So this video should lead really nicely from the last video I made, which was glacial travel and that setup that you have with the rope for 3 people travelling over that sort of glaciated terrain. And if you haven't watched that video, I'd advise you to watch that first before, looking at the rope setup for 2 people. Because there I covered, how the end people take on that rope as coils and the sort of setup for that. And then also how to sort of tie that middle person on. Even though it's not relevant here for 2 people, it's a really good sort of starting base point. So that's that sort of, setup for 3 people. Taking a step back, if you talk about glacial travel in general, the best number of people on a rope would probably be 4 actually. But it's more typical that you'll be travelling as a rope of 3. And just as likely actually to be climbing with a friend, a partner, as a rope party of 2. So I'm just going to sort of lead into that now on this video. It's sort of the rope setup and distances for 2 people travelling over a glacier. I know you'd have seen in the last video, what I like to do is talk about my rope in terms of arm spans, trying to get away from meters. I mean, I know it's a 50-metre rope, but I'd like to sort of chat about arm spans when I talk about distances and lengths between people, because it's a lot easier to get your head around and it's a lot easier to measure when you're actually out in the mountains with your friends. So if I'm talking about arm spans for glacial travel for 2 people, then for me, with my size arm spans, I want to see a minimum of 10 arm spans between 2 people early season. And then as that sort of snow gets stripped back, as I've talked about before, then I'll extend those arm spans, up to maybe 12, 14, 15 arm spans, depending on the terrain, depending on how serious the crevasse situation is, or whether it's snowed overnight and it's more likely that you're going to go down into a crevasse. So it's a starting point of 10, and then I'll extend that, depending on the conditions. And you'd have also seen in my last video that the rope I've got here, this 50-metre rope, for me, this is 30 arm spans. So that as a starting point, if we go with 10 arm spans between each of us, then we want 10 arm spans on as coils. And like I said before, the first person that's ready, doesn't matter who's got their crampons and harness on first, they can flake the rope out, check there's no knots in it, check there's no nicks in it from the last time you used it, and then set the rope out ready to go. And very simply, as we did before, you just want to work through 10 arm spans through to a point, part way along the rope, to where we then make a marker. And that marker is just a simple overhand knot in the rope that just marks that sort of 10 arm spans that you've made to the end. And then from this knot, we're just going to mark another 10 arm spans, with another overhand knot, and that gives us that 10 arm spans in the middle there. So it means that straight away, as soon as somebody's ready, it's early in the morning, it's cold, as soon as that person's ready, they can tie on the end with a figure of 8, and then they can take coils up to that first knot, that marker, and that other person can do the same the other way, and you're both working towards those marker knots, knowing that you're also leaving 10 arm spans in the middle of the rope, and that's sort of ready to go once you're sort of roped up. So, I'll set myself up, but essentially 10 arm spans in from either side, get those marker knots in, and then you're kind of ready to go for glacial travel. So once we've got these 2 marker knots, we know that either end we've got 10 arm spans, and we've got sort of, 10 arm spans in the middle here. Now with 2 people, it's probably the most serious with regards travelling on the crevasses, because if one person goes down, you're completely reliant on one person to arrest that fall. Okay, so it's quite a big job for that individual. So from that last video, you've seen that I've taken coils. I made sure that that point of attachment is nice and low, so that person's weight comes onto our legs and through our crampons, and more able to hold that person go down in a crevasse. I then get a load, dig my ice axe in, and then make myself a snow anchor or whatever I can to aid, some sort of, rescue scenario. But when there's 2 people, it's a lot harder to hold one individual going in. So what we can do is we can actually maybe put some brake knots in the rope, and that will just help me and support that person, whether it be me or whoever else, support that person holding that other individual that's gone into the crevasse. Because you can imagine, you know, when the person goes into the crevasse, there's a big strain on me initially, but if some of that strain is taken away by a knot that breaks and bites into the edge of that crevasse, it helps me arrest the fall and takes a little bit of weight from me. So it's kind of supportive to me actually arresting them. So, you know, by adding a number of knots in the rope really helps with me arresting a fall. I wouldn't put, you know, too many knots in the rope, you know, maybe just a handful of knots, because what you'll find is, A, it's great for holding somebody going down the crevasse, but the downside is it's far more complicated, you know, when you actually set up a pulley system to work through the knots when you're helping that person out again. But having said that, the most important thing at the very outset is you actually arrest that person's fall and hold them in the crevasse so they don't go down too far, and you've got them safely. And so if that's having knots in the rope and making it more complex for the setup, then so be it. I've actually got that person. So we just need to put some knots in the rope. So if we work away to the middle of the rope here, the middle of this sort of big bite that I've created, okay, and let's put a figure of 8 knot here, just in the middle of the rope. Pull the knot nice and tight, a little bit of a loop there. And like I say, hopefully what will happen is that as the rope, you know, runs over the edge of the crevasse, it actually creates a groove, you know, like it cuts through that sort of lip of the crevasse as the weight comes onto it. So as it cuts a groove into the crevasse, hopefully that knot will catch on there and support you arresting that person's fall. So what we can do is just from that point there, let's just do one big arm span. Let's make a figure of 8 knot there. And let's just do another one. So that's another one here, another big arm span. Another figure of 8 knots. And let's do the same the other way. Nice big arm span. So all I'm doing here, as I said, just putting knots in that rope just to sort of support me holding that person, because that is the most important thing, isn't it? It's actually holding somebody going in a crevasse. Yeah, it's more complicated when it comes to the sort of rope work to get a person back out, but ultimately you've got them. So we've got the end mark, the sort of marker here that the person is taking coils up to, so that's 10 arm spans. And then from here we've got our rope that's knotted. It's a little bit more complicated, but the rope that's knotted here with some figure of 8 knots, and those knots are the knots that are going to sort of hopefully bite into that edge of the crevasse if you did go down in. And then we've got another marker knot here, and then 10 arm spans to the end. So get that rope set out like this for glacial travel for 2 people. Now if the glacier is well filled in, it's very unlikely that someone's going to go down in a hole. Just have the 10 arm spans out, and then as the sort of snow gets stripped back, have a few more arm spans. But certainly knotting the rope, you know, does facilitate you actually holding that person a lot more easily, especially if there's a weight difference, size difference between each person, or you know, you're going down slightly steeper terrain again. You know, it's a lot harder to hold somebody when that ground steepens up. So just some things to think about. You know how to tie onto the ends of the ropes with figures of 8. You know how to take the coils now, but it's just really that initial rope setup for 2 people in this instance.